Ingrid Bergman was once condemned on the floor of the United States Senate itself. In 1950, a senator publicly labeled her a bad influence, an immoral woman, unworthy of ever setting foot in America again. Within just a few months, Hollywood's purest symbol was pushed to the margins. Her films banned, her name erased, audiences turning their backs as if they had never loved her at all. Yet the woman cast out was one of the rarest talents of 20th century cinema. Without heavy makeup, without a carefully manufactured image, Ingrid Bergman stepped onto the screen with raw emotional truth. Every glance carried depth, every silence bore weight. That very honesty lifted her to the heights, and it was the same honesty that made her unwilling to live by the molds her era imposed. Behind the applause lay a life continually stretched between opposing poles. Art and public morality, the longing for freedom and the cost of choosing it, dazzling glory and years of banishment in solitude. She left Hollywood at the moment of her greatest power, entering a perilous creative path, accepting the loss of reputation in order to do what she believed was right. Ingrid Bergman's story is not a straight ascent of a star. It is a series of violent collisions between talent and prejudice, between devotion to art and ruthless judgment. And it is within those fractures that her true portrait finally begins to emerge. The rejection that Ingrid Bergman would later be forced to endure did not come out of nowhere. It struck a person who had long been familiar with loss, with the feeling of standing alone before the world, long before the lights of Hollywood ever found her. Ingrid Bergman was born in 1915 in Stockholm, into a small family whose warmth lasted far more briefly than one might expect. Her mother died when Ingrid was only 2 years old, leaving behind a void without a name in her earliest years. Her father, a photographer with artistic sensibility and a quiet inner life, became her sole anchor. It was in his dark room, amid the smell of chemicals and the light filtered through a camera lens, that Ingrid first grew accustomed to standing before a camera. Not as a child's game, but as a habit essential to survival. Standing still, focusing, and allowing emotion to surface through the face. Tragedy came again, earlier than any preparation could allow. When Ingrid was 12, her father died of stomach cancer. From that moment, she became truly orphaned, passed among various relatives. Each household came with a new set of rules, a new adaptation, and another lesson in observing rather than revealing. Ingrid's reserve was not weakness, but the result of having to listen more than speak, remember more than resist. At school, she did not stand out. She was neither an outstanding student nor the center of any social circle. But the stage and cinema opened a different kind of space, one where emotions were not interrupted, where silence carried meaning, where a look could say everything. That sense of belonging in front of the camera soon drove Ingrid toward film not as a vague dream, but as a concrete escape. At 15, she applied to work as an extra at a Stockholm studio. The work was repetitive, the roles anonymous. But one small detail was enough to change the young girl's perception. For the first time in her life, Ingrid realized she could be paid to do something that made her feel alive. Not standing still and enduring, not silently adapting, but being fully present in the moment. From that point on, a cinema was no longer a pastime, it became a means of survival. 2 years later, Ingrid was accepted into the Royal Dramatic Theatre School of Sweden, the same institution that had trained Greta Garbo. It should have been a prestigious, stable, and safe path. But the prospect of spending another 5 years sitting in classrooms, waiting her turn, left her restless. Cinema had already allowed her to feel the true pulse of creative work, and Ingrid no longer had the patience to return to a state of merely being prepared. When the opportunity for a speaking role arrived earlier than expected, she accepted it immediately, despite fierce opposition from her instructors, who viewed the decision as impulsive and undisciplined. For Ingrid, it was not rebellion, but fear of being trapped. Her earliest roles in Swedish cinema quickly revealed a difference. Ingrid did not perform in a demonstrative manner, nor did she try to impress through grand gestures. She entered her characters the way she entered everyday life, listening, reacting, existing. That naturalness made audiences believe her before they had time to analyze. Intermezzo, 1936, was the clearest example. In the role of a piano teacher entangled in an unacceptable relationship, Ingrid did not seek to dramatize the story, but allowed emotion to flow through silences and unflinching glances. The film exceeded expectations, not only because of its plot, but because of a face that made viewers forget they were watching a performance. 3 years later, Ingrid left Europe with a single suitcase. In May 1939, she arrived in America in a state of both excitement and uncertainty, unsure whether she could survive within a system notorious for its harshness. From the very beginning, she faced pressure to be corrected. Too tall, eyebrows too thick, a name considered difficult for American ears. The suggestions to change her appearance and identity were not presented as options, but as demands. Ingrid refused, not out of absolute confidence, but because she understood that if she had to trade away herself to be accepted, that acceptance would never be enough. Intermezzo, a love story, 1939, was released under those conditions and became an immediate sensation. The film was not only a commercial success, but also introduced a model entirely unlike the stars manufactured by formula. Ingrid appeared almost without makeup, made no effort to conform to Hollywood standards of allure, and it was precisely that simplicity that made her stand out. Audiences saw in her a kind of leading woman they had never known before, not polished into a symbol, but honest enough to be human. The difference that Intermezzo created quickly placed Ingrid Bergman before a new test. Could that very naturalness endure when confronted with roles demanding far more extreme transformation? The answer came in 1941 with Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. In a story saturated with instinct, desire, and fractured identity, Ingrid was no longer the familiar gentle presence. Her character moved between allure and fear, between the pull of forbidden longing and the instinct for self-preservation. What mattered was not grand gestures, but the way she allowed the character's psychology to change color little by little, almost without warning. The role did not need noisy rupture to dismantle her earlier image. It proved that Ingrid could enter darkness while retaining absolute credibility. A year later, events slipped beyond Hollywood's own control. To Casablanca, 1942, emerged amid wartime conditions, initially regarded as a middling project rather than a studio's strategic gamble. Yet audience response swiftly turned the film into a phenomenon. Box office revenue surpassed $4 million, a staggering figure at a moment when the entire world was tightening its belt because of war. Between Rick and Ilsa, between choices that could never be whole, Ingrid delivered a suspended emotional state rarely seen. During production, the script was constantly revised. The character's final decision was not settled until very late. Ingrid entered each scene with genuine uncertainty, and that very quality gave her gaze a constant hesitation, as though the heart were asking questions before reason could intervene. Ilsa was neither a woman of melodrama nor of firm resolve. She existed in the in-between, and audiences recognized themselves there. If Casablanca made Ingrid an icon, Gaslight, 1944, forced viewers to confront a far subtler fear. As a woman whose trust in her own perceptions is slowly eroded, Ingrid did not scream or plead for rescue. The disintegration unfolded gradually, a confused glance, a faltering breath, and a moment of self-doubt. The performance carried a rare psychological weight, enough to embed the very concept of gaslighting into popular cultural awareness in the years that followed. In 1945, the Academy awarded her the Oscar for Best Actress. Yet, what made the role terrifying lay not in the prize, but in the unease audiences carried out of the theater. Cruelty, it turns out, needs no violence, only the ability to make a person doubt herself. Success followed success, but each summit Ingrid Bergman reached brought a heavier pressure in its wake. In 1945, The Bells of St. Mary's premiered and swiftly became the highest-grossing film in the United States that year. The image of a compassionate, composed nun, gentle yet never weak, struck exactly the mood of a society just emerging from war. Revenues far exceeded expectations, and for the first time, by Hollywood's own numerical reckoning, Ingrid stood undeniable. She was the industry's top box office actress. On the surface, it was an absolute peak. Inwardly, it also confined her within an ever-tightening role, the moral emblem the public wished to see rather than a real person with shadows and contradictions. A year later, Ingrid deliberately stepped outside that frame with Notorious, 1946, under the direction of Alfred Hitchcock. Her character was no longer the embodiment of spotless virtue, but a woman thrown into the world of espionage, where love, betrayal, and danger intertwine. Hitchcock permitted none of Hollywood's familiar emotional crescendos. Everything had to be compressed. Eyes speaking in place of words, silence carrying the weight of life and death choices. Ingrid had to restrain the instinct to play big that had once brought her success, learning instead to let fear and desire exist just beneath the surface. The film did not need noise to make an impact at the time, but over the years, critics have ranked it among the greatest psychological thrillers ever made, largely because of the fragile balance Ingrid sustained throughout. It was precisely such choices that began to fracture her relationship with Hollywood from 1947 onward. Studios accustomed to exploiting safe formulas started to doubt the profitability of a star who repeatedly chose psychologically heavy scripts with little pure entertainment appeal. Major contracts gradually narrowed, leading roles of her stature became scarcer. At the heart of this tension lay an irreconcilable conflict. Hollywood wanted Ingrid Bergman to remain a flawless image on display, while she increasingly refused to live as a static symbol. The silence surrounding her in the late 1940s was not a sign of decline, but a pressure-filled pause before a decision that would cause the entire system to turn its back. Before her turn toward Europe could be assessed on artistic grounds, a symbolic blow struck Ingrid Bergman from the United States itself. In 1950, during a session of the U.S. Senate, a senator publicly delivered a speech condemning her before Congress, calling Ingrid Bergman a powerful influence for evil, a dangerous moral influence. This was not an attack from tabloids or fringe opinion, but an official denunciation from the highest authority in the nation. Rare in Hollywood history, an actress was named on the Senate floor not for politics, not for national security, but simply for violating the moral norms that post-war American society was determined to defend at all costs. From that moment, Ingrid Bergman's Hollywood career was effectively frozen. There was no formal ban, yet every door closed. No major contracts, no flagship studio projects, no Oscar nominations, no invitations to appear in roles deemed safe. A star who had once topped the box office was pushed to the margins without a declaration, through the collective silence of an entire system. Hollywood did not need to expel her, it only had to pretend she no longer existed. That period of silence did not drive Ingrid Bergman back toward safety. Instead, it pushed her entirely off her familiar orbit and toward Europe, where cinema was not measured by weekend box office figures, but by the degree of honesty with human experience. From 1950 onward, Ingrid worked in Italy in films directed by Roberto Rossellini, beginning with Stromboli, and her characters were no longer protected by studio lighting or tightly structured scripts. She stood amid harsh landscapes, sea winds, and jagged rock, within long takes that forced actors to exist rather than perform. Ingrid accepted this as a trial. No longer a pampered star, she worked for far lower pay than in Hollywood, filmed under austere conditions and punishing schedules, in exchange for the freedom to experiment and to fail. Europa 51, 1952, pushed her even further into emotionally uncomfortable territory. Ingrid's character did not seek sympathy, but descended into a moral and spiritual crisis in which compassion itself could be deemed deviant by society. Rossellini's camera was not meant to glorify beauty. It compelled Ingrid's face to confront emptiness, disorientation, and questions without answers. When Journey to Italy was released in 1954, the fractures of human emotion were placed on screen through moments that seemed as if nothing happens, yet carried immense weight. Ingrid needed no crescendos. The fatigue, distance, and silence between two people were enough to tell the story. At the time, these films were considered commercial failures. The American press attacked them fiercely, viewing them as proof that a star who had once dominated the box office had lost her way. Ingrid, in many eyes, had traded fame for a kind of cinema seen as obscure, austere, and indifferent to audience pleasure. Yet it was precisely this refusal to compromise that allowed these works to outlive their initial judgments. Years later, they would be reassessed as foundational stones of modern cinema, profoundly influencing visual storytelling and rhythm, cited by filmmakers such as Scorsese, Godard, and Antonioni as key inspirations. For Ingrid Bergman, this period did not bring immediate glory, but it forced her to answer a core question: make art to be loved or to be honest? She chose the path that allowed no easy return. That uncompromising choice in Europe seemed to mark the end of Ingrid Bergman's relationship with Hollywood. Yet the distance itself prepared a moment no one could have predicted. In 1956, Anastasia appeared as a final test. Ingrid portrayed a woman living amid fractured memory and a stolen identity, a character both fragile and resilient, carrying the sensation of being rejected by the world, a feeling Ingrid knew all too well in life. Without grand reconciliatory statements or loud publicity campaigns, the film spoke for itself. Box office returns exceeded expectations, audiences came back, and when Ingrid won her second Academy Award for Best Actress, the Oscar ceremony witnessed what would be called the greatest comeback in the awards' history. Her A-list status was restored not through nostalgia, but through a performance deep enough to force Hollywood to look back at itself. After Anastasia, Ingrid did not return to old grooves. From the late 1950s to nearly 1970, she entered a rare international phase in which linguistic borders ceased to be barriers and became tools of expression. Ingrid acted in English, French, Italian, and German, accepting the rigors of mastering dialogue with exacting precision so that no role would feel foreign. In The Inn of the Sixth Happiness, 1958, she became a resilient Western woman amid a chaotic China, a role demanding both physical and emotional endurance, where steadfastness required no display. Goodbye Again, 1961, placed Ingrid within the emotional world of a mature woman, confronting love, age, and loss without the shelter of romantic illusion. By 1969, a woman called Golda opened another door. For the first time, Ingrid approached the image of a female political leader not through slogans or surface power, but through the weight of responsibility and solitude. The role did not ignite the box office, but it quietly laid groundwork for how cinema would later view women in positions of leadership. At this stage, Ingrid Bergman no longer needed to prove she had returned. She was already there, speaking many languages, carrying many faces, and continuing to choose roles that asked audiences to pause before they applauded. After 1969, as the rhythm of world cinema shifted and new faces came to dominate the screen, Ingrid Bergman did not try to hold her position through familiarity. She waited, and it was precisely that waiting that opened the door to a late peak few could ever replicate. In 1974, Murder on the Orient Express arrived as a severe test. A crowded ensemble cast filled with major names, a role for Ingrid that was neither long nor central, offering no room for technical display. Yet within that confined space, she chose to strip expression down to the bare minimum. The eyes, the breath, the hesitation between short lines of dialogue became the focus. No monologues, no overt climaxes. Her performance was praised by critics as so refined it was almost invisible if the viewer was not paying close attention. The Academy Award for Best Supporting Actress came as a belated confirmation. Ingrid Bergman's power lay in her command of silence, not in screen time. From there, she gradually withdrew from commercial cinema and moved into the harsher territory of television and projects that demanded pure inner strength. In 1978, Autumn Sonata placed Ingrid Bergman before a rare challenge, confronting the rawest emotional layers of a mother without shields, without compromise. The camera did not seek beauty. It patiently observed inner fractures. Every small movement carried the weight of an entire accumulated lifetime. Critics later regarded this as one of the deepest interior performances of the 20th century, where acting ceased to be technique and became a controlled exposure of the self. In her final years, even as her health declined, Ingrid did not abandon her work. A woman called Golda in 1982 placed her in the image of an aging, resolute political leader burdened by history. Her physical strength no longer allowed for long shooting days, but each time she appeared before the camera, she maintained an almost absolute concentration. The Emmy Award for this role was not merely a television honor. It marked the closing of an artistic journey spanning more than 4 decades, where experience, loss, and professional discipline converged. 3 Oscars, 2 for leading roles and 1 for supporting, 1 Emmy, 1 Tony on Broadway, more than 50 film and television works, numerous films that topped the box office in the 1940s and 1950s. These figures do not exist as a dry list of achievements. They interweave, reflecting a career that continually moved between spotlight and shadow, between immediate acclaim and lasting value. When the American Film Institute ranked Ingrid Bergman among the 5 greatest actresses of all time, it was not merely a tribute to talent, but an acknowledgement of a path that never compromised with ease, even in the final years when the lights were no longer waiting. With her professional summit now closed by roles of contemplation, the story of Ingrid Bergman's life naturally flows backward to a relationship that quietly shaped her during her earliest years under international attention. Before Hollywood knew Ingrid as an icon, she met Peter Aron Lindström in mid-1930s Sweden, when she was still a young actress searching for her footing. Lindström, a Swedish dentist a few years older than her, carried a calm, practical demeanor wholly removed from the volatile artistic world Ingrid was entering. That very stability created the initial pull. For a girl orphaned early in life, always living with a sense of lacking support, Lindström represented a life with structure, order, and the promise of safety. They married in 1937, when Ingrid was barely in her early 20s, and her film career remained domestic in scale. In 1938, their daughter Pia was born, binding Ingrid to another role alongside acting. At that time, the marriage functioned in relative harmony. Lindström worked outside the entertainment industry, Ingrid acted in Swedish films, and the family existed as a quiet rear base. But from 1939 onward, when Ingrid carried a single suitcase to America and was unexpectedly retained after the success of Intermezzo, that balance began to shift. Geographic distance quickly turned into psychological distance. Lindström and Pia later joined her in the United States, but Hollywood life, with its dense shooting schedules, constant attention, and radically different norms, left Lindström increasingly alienated. He could not find himself in that world, while Ingrid was drawn ever deeper into work and intensely personal artistic choices. The differences did not explode at once. They accumulated into long layers of silence. Ingrid refused to shrink herself into the family icon expected of her, while Lindström could not keep pace with a life fragmented by film sets, travel, and ambition. When the fractures could no longer be concealed, the marriage lost its capacity for dialogue. By 1950, after more than a decade together, and at a moment when Ingrid had already turned onto a different path of living, they officially divorced. Pia remained with her father for a long period, while Ingrid moved forward, carrying the aftershocks of a relationship that had once been an anchor, and then gradually became a quiet fissure running parallel to the public rises and falls of her career. The collapse of her marriage to Petter Aaron Lindström did not open the door to a new legal union, but it created an emotional void that Ingrid Bergman entered with all the vulnerability of someone who had lived too long under discipline and expectation. It was within that void that in 1945 she met Gregory Peck on the set of Spellbound. Their meeting did not have the shape of a loud, lightning-strike romance. Peck was then a rising star, calm, reserved, carrying a quiet authority very different from the men who had previously passed through Ingrid's life. They were placed side by side in a working environment that demanded absolute trust. Long takes, complex psychological rhythms, glances required to speak what could not be said aloud. The bond formed slowly, almost without a name. There were no promises, no shared plans, and certainly no vision of marriage. Both understood their limits with painful clarity. Ingrid was still legally married to Lindström until near the end of the 1940s, while Peck had already entered his own family life. Conversations after shooting wrapped, short walks, silences that lingered longer than necessary, became their refuge. For Ingrid, Peck did not represent impulsiveness or rebellion. He was the feeling of being seen and heard, something she was increasingly lacking in her personal life at that time. There was no wedding, no children, and no attachment recognized by society. That very lack of formality gave the relationship a tone that was both deep and painful. Both kept it strictly private, not out of cowardice, but because they fully understood the price of crossing the line. Hollywood at the time was unforgiving, especially toward a woman being constructed as a moral symbol. That pressure forced the relationship to exist in a prolonged state of suspension, where emotions were not allowed to reach fulfillment, yet could not be denied. When Spellbound ended, they did not cling to one another with promises of a shared future. The separation unfolded in silence, heavier than any argument. Peck returned to his life. Ingrid continued down a path of personal choices that would soon push her out of Hollywood's orbit. And there was no divorce date to mark it because there had never been a marriage, no public breakup for the press to dissect. Only a lingering aftertaste remained, strong enough that years later, looking back on her life, Ingrid still gave that relationship an irreplaceable place in her memory. Not as a complete love story, but as a rare moment when emotion and understanding briefly touched within the harsh limits of the era. The silence left after Gregory Peck did not disappear. It settled, waiting for another encounter, more violent, more decisive. At the end of 1948, in a small European cinema, Ingrid Bergman watched Rome, Open City, and Paisa, films that shook her entire conception of Hollywood cinema. Behind them stood Roberto Rossellini, an Italian director famous for dismantling narrative conventions, filming amid the ruins of war and using real people instead of polished actors. In early 1949, Ingrid wrote Rossellini a short letter, without strategy, without defenses, simply asking to work with him. That letter opened a chain of events that could not be reversed. They met in Italy in 1949 during preparations for Stromboli. There were none of Hollywood's familiar courtship rituals. Rossellini worked in a rough, direct manner, placing Ingrid in harsh shooting conditions. Blazing sun, sea winds, treacherous terrain, frames that did not flatter beauty. That rawness awakened the artist in her that had been slowly suffocated. The relationship quickly moved beyond creative collaboration, unfolding while Ingrid had not yet completed the legal end of her marriage to Petter Lindstrom. In 1950, news of her pregnancy during that period exploded as a moral scandal in the American media, driving Ingrid out of Hollywood within a matter of months. After finalizing her divorce from Lindstrom in 1950, Ingrid and Rossellini married the same year in Mexico. Their shared life began in Italy, completely removed from the American studio system. They had 3 children, Isabella Rossellini, born in 1952, followed by twins Isotta Ingrid and Roberto Ingmar in 1956. That family life ran parallel to an unrelenting rhythm of work. Rossellini continued making films in his own uncompromising way. Ingrid continued taking on difficult roles with small audiences and almost no safety net. Europa 51 and Journey to Italy emerged from that atmosphere. Long shooting days, tense artistic arguments, and an ever-widening cultural divide. Rossellini was not an easy partner. His authoritarian temperament, extramarital relationships, and tight control over Ingrid's professional direction created sustained pressure. The creative freedom that had once drawn her in gradually turned into a feeling of confinement within a new world, where every decision revolved around another person's vision. Ingrid endured in silence, at once the mother of 3 young children and the bearer of the consequences of an American boycott that had never fully ended. By 1957, the relationship could no longer be repaired. Ingrid and Rossellini finalized their divorce, closing 8 years that had been both incandescent and corrosive. There was no complete turning away. They maintained contact for their children and for the cinema that had bound 2 lives together. What Ingrid carried out of that marriage was not only 3 children, but a deep cut into her reputation, her identity as an artist, and the necessity of rebuilding her career from the ashes of the very choices she had dared to make. After stepping away from the collision-filled orbit of Roberto Rossellini, Ingrid Bergman emerged from a period in which every emotion had been pushed to its extreme. No longer driven to plunge into explosive relationships, she sought a different mode of presence, quieter, more ordered, less dramatic, not yet solid enough to support the remainder of her life. In that context, in 1957, Ingrid met Lars Schmidt, a Swedish theater impresario whose work was rooted primarily in Europe and who was accustomed to backstage rhythms rather than the glare of camera lights. The attraction between them did not come from fierce passion. Lars approached Ingrid with the calm of someone who understood structures, contracts, performance schedules, the necessary limits that allow an artist to endure over time. He did not try to reshape her, nor did he seek to control her artistic choices. That distance was precisely what made Ingrid feel safe for the first time after years of living under constant scrutiny. In December 1958, they married in an unpretentious ceremony, marking a shared desire to build a private life separate from public clamor. Their years together unfolded mostly in Europe, between Paris, London, and cities with vibrant theatrical life. With no children together, their relationship revolved around work, production schedules, tours, and Ingrid's gradual shift toward the stage, television, beyond international projects. Lars acted as organizer and guardian of her working space, helping Ingrid re-establish a stable rhythm after years swept along by public controversy. She continued to make films and perform on stage, but she was no longer forced into the extreme choices of earlier years. Even so, stability did not mean absolute peace. Prolonged geographic separation, relentless touring, and Ingrid's fiercely independent nature gradually created fissures not immediately visible. Lars was accustomed to managing, Ingrid to deciding for herself. Two mature personalities moved in parallel, but did not always meet within the same tempo of life. As age and illness entered Ingrid's life in the early 1970s, psychological pressure increased, and the bond that had relied on discipline lost the elasticity it needed. In 1975, Ingrid Bergman and Lars Schmidt finalized their divorce after nearly 17 years together. There was no scandal, no public accusation. What stands out is that they did not sever ties. Lars remained present in Ingrid's final years, serving as a confidant, someone who understood her better than anyone else in her post-fame life. When illness forced Ingrid to withdraw, Lars was the one closest to her, not as a husband, but as a part of her life that had accompanied her through the longest stretch of quiet maturity. What remains after all the broken relationships, professional exiles, and moments when the public turned away is not an image polished for easy remembrance, but a mark difficult to erase from the history of cinema. Ingrid Bergman left a legacy that does not sit neatly within trophies or rankings, but in the way she compelled an entire system to change how it viewed female performance. Before her, cinematic beauty was built on control, thick makeup, and clearly signposted emotions. Ingrid arrived and shattered that with a different presence, a face that did not conceal fatigue, eyes that allowed silence to exist, acting that did not need to prove it was acting. That influence spread beyond its era. Her performances in Gaslight, Notorious, Journey to Italy, and Autumn Sonata became teaching materials for generations of directors and actors, not for elaborate technique, but for the ability to hold emotion in a compressed state, allowing audiences to step into the character's psychological void. Films once dismissed as difficult or not entertaining later became foundations of modern cinematic language, directly shaping the thinking of Martin Scorsese, Jean-Luc Godard, Michelangelo Antonioni, and a generation of filmmakers who viewed cinema as an inner space rather than mere surface narrative. On the level of popular culture, Ingrid Bergman is a rare case in which public image and private life collided openly and then coexisted within collective memory. And she was never fully cleansed after scandal, yet history did not punish her as the society of her time tried to do. What remains is a more complex model, a woman willing to pay the price for personal choice, willing to trade professional safety for creative freedom, and still return to the artistic center by sheer ability. The American Film Institute's placement of her among the greatest actresses of all time is not merely an honor for talent. but a belated acknowledgement that cinema cannot evolve if it insists on forcing people to live within a single moral mold. Ingrid Bergman's deepest legacy lies in the space she opened for imperfection to exist on screen. After her, audiences accepted female characters who were more contradictory, quieter, even uncomfortable. Cinema learned that strength does not necessarily require grand speeches or noisy tragedy. Sometimes a gaze held a moment too long, a silence left unfilled, is enough for generations to keep returning, wanting to look more closely, one more time. Ingrid Bergman closed her journey not with perfection, but with the weight of a life that dared to pay its own price. What keeps her name alive is not only the radiant moments on screen, but the way she stood firm after the spotlight collapsed, continuing to work, to choose, to take responsibility for herself. Few artists have forced film history to reassess old standards so thoroughly, and even fewer have left their mark through silence, through emotional spaces that refuse explanation. If you have ever fallen silent before a look that needed no dialogue, felt your heart sink during a long, unbroken quiet on screen, or realized that true beauty sometimes lies in fragility and courage, leave a word of greeting for the woman who dared to live, to love, and to pay the price so that cinema could be more truthful. And if you wish to continue along this journey of discovering the real people behind legends, support the channel so we have reason to keep telling stories that deserve to be remembered like this.